without further ado, let me bring out Morgan Rhodes, our moderator, director Ted Witcher, and Melodee Sutton, who is a music coordinator in the film. And so I hope you guys enjoy this. This is a wonderful conversation, again, about the movie Love Jones, about the work of Pilar McCurry, and thank you all so much for coming out.
All right, how many people out there have seen Love Jones? All right, it is a great honor for me to be here. I was telling Ted earlier what Love Jones meant to me as a new college graduate when the film came out. Don't do any math, I'm older. And it meant something to me because visibility for Black women and Black images and Black love was rare. And so this film, I was able to see myself. So for me, it is a great honor to be here with both Ted, the writer and director, and Melodee Sutton, who alongside the late, great Pilar McCurry helped to put the music together. So please, let's welcome them in. All right, so I'm gonna jump right into it. The opening sequence, for me, is a thing of beauty for two reasons. One, because of the music. It starts out with what we just heard, Dionne Farris, Hopeless, but that black and white sequence is one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen. It gave me a feeling about Chicago that I didn't know, because at that time I'd never visited. What side of Chicago, or what slice of life of Chicago were you trying to give us, not just in that sequence, but in the film overall?
I'm trying to remember where I got the idea for doing it that way. I'm sure I stole it from somebody, but I honestly can't remember. But that was Ernie Holzman, who was the director of photography on the movie, shot all of that, except for one shot I did. But all of that is his individual work. We were just prepping the movie in Chicago, and I sent him out, really. And every weekend, he would just go out with this little camera. And I left him to his own devices. But what we wound up doing in shaping it, editorially, was it sort of starts with a macro view, right? It starts with, kind of cityscapes, and slowly the idea was that it would slowly start to narrow in on, the city, and then the neighborhood, and then the street, and then the face, right? All the way down in. So that was the idea, was to kind of start large and gradually get small to regular, that this would be a movie about regular people. And then, of course, formally, the idea was that the shots themselves would reflect her photography that you would see later on, in the movie. And so Melodee McDaniel, also an incredible talent, incredible photographer, brilliant. She was out there with us when we were shooting some of the black and white stuff, and she would be shooting the corresponding still that I knew I would use as a prop in the movie later on. So that you would get a memory. You would, like, as the guy's flipping the book, you've seen the movie, as the guy's flipping the book, right, with her pictures in it, you might get a memory of, like, oh, I saw the movie version of that, and then at the end of the picture, we'll go back to black and white. So that was the idea.
I've never seen an opening like that, and I wasn't sure.
Sure you have.
No, I thought it was a flashback.
No, I stole it from, and now I can't remember. I can't remember where I got that from, but it's not. Where did I get that from? I'll think about it, and then I'll text you, and then you can tell the audience.
Shout out to whoever helped Ted with that.
Whichever more brilliant director I stole that idea from.
Whose decision was it to open with that song? Had you planned to open with that song when you envisioned the sequence?
No, that came in a little bit later on.
Okay.
I had Daryl Jones, who did the score, had written a cue for that section, because the idea was the conception of it changed, and this is the interface with the.
I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
Oh, I'll let you get in. This is the interface with the record company. Was a little challenging. I had Daryl write a cue that was my idea for it, was that it would be a kind of gospel influenced cue. So he wrote some gospel kind of changes, and Kenny Garrett, who played alto on the score, blew over it. It was just piano and saxophone. Beautiful. It's a beautiful little 2-minute section of music that he wrote, because one of my ideas for it was that section of the movie would be much like the invocation part of a church service. You set the table for the sermon to follow, right? So I thought, well, let me just ride on that idea and really have like some music that would be for that audience, for this audience, very evocative of the beginning of a church service. And that would be the black and white section, and then the movie would start. So, okay, well, so I had it all worked out in my head, but then, the record company needed to have another track in the movie. And now, fortunately, we got the day was saved, because that was the track that they sent, right? Beautiful song, Hopeless, but that was not my original idea. But in the end, it worked out fine. But the reason why I was resistant to it was because it changed. Not because I hated the song. The song's great. She's great. It's a great tune. That's actually Van Hunt wrote that tune. I don't know if you all know.
Yeah. Along with
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Van Hunt wrote that. I'll get you another piece of anecdote before I let. I don't want to hog your whole vibe. Do you all know? I was just telling you. Do you all know the drummer John Blackwell? Yeah. Prince's longtime drummer, who he just passed recently, not long before Prince. I thought John told me that was his first session as a 20 whatever when he first got called to do a studio session as a drummer. Hopeless was the very first job he got booked for. And that's Randy Jackson playing bass, and he produced it. And so they sent over something great, but I was resistant to it because it changed the idea of what the sequence meant in the context of the whole movie. So I pushed back a little bit, but
a little bit.
Right. They threatened to sue me. So.
No, I think we had to just gently persuade you about the power of the real estate of a good song for a soundtrack album. And you understood the need for a soundtrack album to drive the marketing for the project. So, you made us do our due diligence. We had to take a lot of time in pitching the project to artists and really getting them to understand how important the music was to the body of the film. And so that meant that we screened particular scenes, we gave them character studies so that they understood the motivations, and we were very lucky in working with Sony Music Soundtracks at the time because they had this really strong neo-soul roster that really spoke to the overall.
It was the only company.
Right. We had the luxury with this project because it was made at a time when there was I think there's never been really anything like it before or since, but at this time, in the course of, I guess you would call it contemporary Black soundtracks, it was really a really exciting creative piece. It was something that it was not very hard for us to sell to artists at all. Once we were able to either send them a synopsis or actually screen the project, everybody was full on board. And that's not always the case. Like, every director has a wish list where they want the Lauryn Hills of the world and all of these great platinum artists, but rarely are those artists as interested in sitting down and writing a song for your movie. In this case, Maxwell, for instance, was like just starting to peak as this big platinum artist. And we were able to send him scenes from the picture and immediately get a response. I'm sitting in my bathtub watching this on tour and I want to remix something specifically for this. You guys can have it. You can do what you want to do with it. So it was like that way across the board. And in the case of the main title sequence, it really was about it had to be something that would convince this director to give up that prime real estate, because for him, it was more so about, does it serve my picture? Not about who the artist is, what the record company's marketing budget is. He didn't care about the fact that we could have video rights or any of that stuff. It was really about, does this work? Does it fit what I want to say with the picture? And luckily for us, Dion Ferris and Van Hunt gave us something that worked perfectly. It fit the sentiment that he was going for, and it turned out to be this signature piece that really spoke to the film and gave it this timelessness.
Got lucky.
Yeah,
Got lucky.
absolutely.
I mean, to be honest with you, I actually never even said this. I didn't even really want a soundtrack. Did I tell you? I've never told you this. I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you why. This. I didn't want a soundtrack because I felt that was a convention of black movies that they were sticking me in. That the same
makes
studio
so
would
much sense
the
now.
same studio would make. We made the movie at New Line in '96 or whatever, right? So the same studio would make a fairly generic romantic comedy, something like Bed of Roses or something, just an average kind of movie. There's no soundtrack for that. There's a score, and so I thought, well, because I'm black, I gotta have some tunes or something like I got a whole conception for how the score is going to sound, right? So I really was angry about having to do it in the first place, to be honest with you.
That's why you gave us such a hard time.
Well,
like,
so
every
once
step of the way.
I saw the layout, and then the other thing is, it's not like I was making any money on it. So like what, there was no personal investment.
I'm just
in
giving
it.
you a hard time, right?
So I thought, well, okay. Once I saw the lay of the land and was like, well, we're going to do it. Then we're going to do it.
Your way.
We're going to do it, and
Right.
it's going to be. We're going to
And
do
it
it.
worked. It was.
But we got I say this all the time, and I did an interview I say the same thing on YouTube, is that it's really incredibly fortunate that we wound up at the Columbia Records, just because when you do the soundtrack, you interview all of the record companies. They all come to pitch you.
And they're interviewing you at the same time.
Right.
Because they have to decide that they are comfortable with the project and they really
Right.
want to put up a budget for your record and to market it.
Right, that's
so
right.
it's like a mutual dance.
Right. So they come in, and I went and met with them all, and they said, these are all the artists we have, and it's the type of record we can make. And really, for the type of thing that I wanted to do, I didn't want to do a typical, for that time, R&B kind of thing. I didn't want a cookie cutter. I didn't want anything cookie cutter about it. I didn't want even cookie cutter R&B.
Right.
And it just so happened at that time there was this movement, we call it, now we look back, we call it neo soul. The movement was afoot at that time. And most of those artists, or many of them, or a number of them, enough to make a record with, happened to be on Columbia Records. It was really just a right place, right time, right company. And then we sent the movie to these artists, and they all responded very, very positively. I said, I had met with Lauren, because we were prepping the movie in Chicago, and the Fugees, their record, the score was out. And was becoming more and more massive, right? And the Fugees had come through Chicago. They were on a mini high school tour before they were going out and doing the main gigs, right? They literally did like a run of like half a dozen inner city high schools and played for kids. And so they came through, and I went to Marshall High School and sat with Lauren backstage, and I wanted her in the movie. I wanted her to play Josie, the part that Lisa Nicole Carson, before I had hired Lisa. And she was like, I can't do it. The touring schedule is just I'm on the road for like the next year or whatever. She couldn't do it. So flash forward, we're cutting the thing, and we're at Columbia, and I told them I wanted a Lauryn Hill solo track. And then we sent do you remember this? We sent the movie. We had a cut of the movie. We sent it to them. They were on tour. They watched it on the bus. And Lauren called back and was like, I have the perfect song for that. And she sent over that sweetest thing. And that was
Right.
That was it. It was finished. It was done. She was like, I have it in my back pocket. And she was like, this is the perfect song for this. And sent it over and gave it up.
Yeah, do you remember like the political backstory with that?
I remember.
It was not that.
It wasn't that simple? Was it more complicated? Because all I know is I'm sitting in my office and I got a Lauryn Hill's tape comes in and I put it in and I'm like, that's going in the movie.
However, like Mr. Witcher said,
Please, this is news to me.
as Mr. Witcher recalls, at the time, it was the Fugees who were a part of this huge tour and pushing this platinum record. So there was no way that Sony was going to give us a Lauryn Hill record. So I don't know how many of you actually have or are familiar with the actual soundtrack album. Although it is Lauryn Hill, the way that it's billed is the Refugee Camp All-Stars featuring Lauryn Hill, because for political reasons, that was just how it had to be. So there was always some type of story for every.
Is that why I could not get them to release that as
a
first
video,
single?
right? That among a lot of other things. Yes, it was just.
This is all news to Ted right now.
Man,
there were like
chapped my ass.
I remember. I know. I think that had a lot to do with like the fight about the main title as well, just because.
Man, because I was
we
like,
couldn't get the leverage on that at all.
But we fought, and the Macy Gray thing. So this is Pilar's genius. This is Pilar. Pilar got hired on this thing. I didn't even want to do a record. And so the studio goes, well, look, we're going to do a record. We have to get a music supervisor. This was Dana Sano at New Line.
Right.
She's like, I got somebody for you. Because I was looking at I had met somebody else who was a famous music supervisor, who I was kind of going to go with because he was recommended by a friend of mine. And Dana was like, no, the person you want is Pilar. She's partnered with this guy, Happy.
Right.
Right, Happy. What's Happy's last name?
Happy Walters.
Happy Walters. She's partnered with Happy Walters at this moment, but she's leaving him to start her own thing. We're going to snatch her. Yeah. And I was like, okay. So I went to have a meeting with Pilar and Happy, and Pilar didn't say anything in the meeting. She was his number 2, and he was the whole meeting. And I was like, I don't know.
Right.
But that chick, what's her story? Because she got crinkly hair and like she looked like she could be in the movie. So what's
exactly?
You know what I mean? Like what's her deal? So she left Happy, started her own thing, and jumped on board as I think her first solo thing, maybe early on, very early on.
Yeah, it was one of the first.
So she and I grabbed onto one another immediately. She goes, "There's somebody you got to see," and I go, "Who?" She goes, "Nobody knows who she is. Her name is Macy Gray. She's playing at the Viper Room.
Right.
I'm gonna take you." I'm like, "Okay, cool. I'm down for whatever." I go to the Viper Room. This is when Macy had a rock band. Okay, so there's this black chick fronting a rock band with that voice.
And big bushy hair.
And the whole thing. And she was not signed. And we go to the Viper Room. It's me, Pilar, and maybe 12 other people. And we're sitting there, and I'm sitting there going, well, I don't even know if she can sing. But it's interesting. I want it. And she got involved with Macy,
yes.
And we had this song, I Try, okay? So, flash forward, it goes down, I go to Columbia Records, I'm like, we got to get the Macy Gray song on the record. And they we went back and forth on this, and finally, somebody over there, who I won't mention, it was one of the guys, they snapped on me, and they were like, look, you need to stop calling me about this. There's no fucking way Macy Gray is going to be on this record. So stop calling. And I was like, okay. So I put the song, I Try, in the movie. Because I was free to do that. It's playing in the background of the club. That song, that recording, not even a redo, that recording becomes a hit. She gets signed. Her record does 3 million. Geniuses.
Where did she get signed?
I don't know. I don't care.
She got signed to Sony.
Yeah, she got signed to Sony. Right. Right. She was on Sony. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Geniuses. I had her before I had that song. It's a hit.
You were ahead of your time.
On that one. I don't know if I could. I don't know if my sensibilities are right on the zeitgeist now. It probably wouldn't work. But at that moment, here in LA, I was, I knew I saw where the thing was going,
Yes.
or where it should go, and maybe where we could help nudge it go.
Absolutely.
So, but that's another thing that did oh man, that.
I mean,
this-
the choices here, the choices throughout the film are great. And I wanted to go back to Lauryn
That was
Lauryn Hill.
Pilar. That's Pilar.
That is
She was like,
Pilar.
you got to see this Macy Gray.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You got to see this Macy Gray. She was
Definitely.
right. She was right.
We always talk about stone cold openers when you open a film or a television show and the hard close. And in the case of Love Jones, the hard close is the sweetest thing, right? There was a hashtag on Twitter a couple weeks ago, best opening line. And in the top 10 has to be that song. The sweetest thing I've ever known is like a kiss on
Really?
the collarbone.
Oh my gosh.
That's one of the best opening lines. And I
that-
saw that tweeted a couple times.
That song, when that came in, that it went. I knew exactly where that was going, and it didn't move. Like
Yeah.
we play around with stuff as you know, move around stuff, try out different ideas. That song went right there. Was the first song after the movie was over, and it never left.
That was going to be my question. Who decided to put it there?
It was
I
a
did,
mutual.
but it was obvious.
It was it was a mutual kind of decision. It
Sure.
was really. There was no other. I mean,
no, there was no other way.
For me personally, there's this euphoria that I feel when I hear that song, and it just fit the vibe of this, this roller coaster love story, and it just lyrically, it worked perfectly, and it was just the right kind of vibe. As a music supervisor, you're always looking for and something that resonates emotionally, and there was just no better way to get across what we were trying to do in terms of how we wanted you to feel walking out of the theater. I think when we all heard it, it was just like, I know for Pilar and I, we spent a lot of time. This was like pre-digital, we had we'd have like our VHS and we'd play songs to picture in this rudimentary way. And we were so excited. This is when you were getting demos on DATs.
Yeah, I stuck at that.
Right.
I had to buy a DAT machine.
Right, exactly, because
that's right.
when the exclusive things that we were getting where it was just, directly from the studio, rough mix, we'd get it, we'd play it, and then either send it by messenger to Ted at the edit bay, but this was something where it was like right away we knew like this was the anchor piece, for sure.
Any favorite uses in the film? I have to say one of my favorites because I'm self-indulged, but one of my favorites is Cassandra Wilson.
Okay, well,
you move.
Yes, that's
It's gorgeous.
So Cassandra, who I love and have loved and will always love. So I'm in there and I'm like, just as an aside, so I went to New York to meet with these, to have this meeting with these guys at some point as we were going back and forth, all this stuff. And this is the moment where I knew I was going to lose. I was going to lose every fight. At the time, Sony was was in the 550 building. I don't know if you all work in the business, right? 550 Madison Avenue, right? It's the whole building.
right.
Is Sony. So I've never been there. So I get out of the car. They have sent a car for me. I get out of the car, pulls up in front of the Sony building. I get out of the car and I go like this. And I go, how much money does it cost just to heat this building for a day? And then when I asked myself that question and thought about the answer to that, I realized that there was no way I was going to win any of these arguments because there's too much money at stake. They have the whole skyscraper in
whole
Midtown
building.
Manhattan. What do they care about me? I'm just a kid who made this movie. So the Cassandra thing. So as part of this, I go, we got to get Cassandra Wilson. And they, to their credit, they indulged me on this because this was not a big, massive pop play for them, right? And she wasn't even on the label. She was on Blue Note. So they indulged me on this one. And my original idea was Cassandra had done a guest shot on a record by a British jazz saxophonist named Courtney Pine. And he had been even though he was a jazz musician, he had been experimenting in the mid-90s with turntablism, right? Because he's coming from the UK, right? So he's got like a lot of different kind of club, DJ type electronic influences. And they had done a Billie Holiday tune in this. So I was like, oh,
That's interesting. Let me try that. So I said to Cassandra, I said, I would love for you to write a song, and then I'm going to get Tricky to produce it.
I like that though.
Right? Right?
I like Tricky.
I'm on it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm on the edge right here.
Tricky,
So,
the British.
Trip hop.
the trip hop artist, formerly of, began his career in Massive
Massive
Attack,
Attack.
right? And then went solo. And she wrote this song. So I'm in New York. She wrote the tune. One of my favorite memories from this whole experience was she had me up to her apartment in Harlem. The first time I'd actually been to Harlem. She lived way uptown, like 160 something in St. Nick, right? Way uptown. I'd never been up that far uptown. And we sat in her apartment smoking cloves, and she played the demo on a DAT. Had a DAT on the demo of that tune. It's just her on piano and singing it that she recorded in her apartment. And she was like, hey, what do you think? I'm thinking about blah. I was like, don't change it. Don't change it. Don't change it. So comes time to figure out I get Tricky. He's into the idea. Great. We get him tickets. We book him. Great. They're going to go to the studios in Mississippi. I'm here in LA. I get a call in the middle of the night. It's Cassandra from the studio in Mississippi. She goes, Ted, Tricky never showed up. I'm like, what do you mean he never showed up? We had him booked on him, but he's like, he just never showed up. And I was like, so now what are we going to do? She goes, well, I got the fellas here, so we're just going to start cutting. I said, go ahead, cut it. So that's her. She produced it with her band and sent that over. And I was like, this is amazing. And then she goes, it's almost done. I'm going to put finger snaps on it. And then I'm going to get Bob Belden to write some strings for it. And I was like, don't do that. Don't put the finger snaps on it. We're black people. We don't need to, we don't have to be told where the fucking beat is. We know where the beat is. She was like, nah, it's for the, I got to put the finger snaps on it. And I was like, and then she goes, I'm going to call Bob Belden and have him do some strings. And I'm like, don't syrupy the shit up. It's fine the way it is. Just leave it spare. And she goes, no, he'll do something real tasteful. It'll be fine. So the version on the record has the finger snaps on the drum track and has Bob Belden's very tasteful string arrangement. It's lovely. The version in the movie that I'm in control of, I took all that shit off. So that's not on there. But I love that song. I love what Cassandra did with it. I love the song. It's beautiful. And then on the other stuff was I knew I had Sony in a trick bag because I wanted to have this. I wanted to have this John Coltrane, Duke Ellington thing on the record, so that anybody who owned this record could not say that they did not have some jazz in their record collection.
Well, that was going to be my question. How did you decide that was the song in a sentimental mood?
Because it was right for the thing, and then the additional advantage was that they already owned the master, so they couldn't fight me.
But see, this is one other thing that Mr. Witcher was not aware of. They did own the masters, but Mrs. Alice Coltrane was the signatory for Mr. Coltrane's estate, so we had to get her permission.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I had to spend, as music coordinator, my role on this project was,
Alice Coltrane?
I was responsible for researching all of the licensing parties for every song in the body of the film and on the soundtrack album, any kind of interpolations or clearances or anything of that nature. And a lot of times there were a lot of things that we reached out and got permission and clearance to use that didn't necessarily make the cut. But in this particular case, we started the clearance process early because this was one of several songs that were written into the script. Right. And there were also specific references to images, either photos of records or, photos of records, photos of liner notes, things along those lines that we also had to get cleared. So in this case, we had to reach out to Mrs. Coltrane. We had to send her the specific descriptions of the scenes and how the music was used. We had to get her blessing. And she wasn't necessarily inclined to allow her husband's music to be used in a feature film. For what was the benefit to her? So we had to, she's an artist in her own right, and she is a well-respected artist and is very well versed in how the business works. So we had to assure her that this was not just some fluff kind of piece. It wasn't anything with gratuitous sex or violence. It was actually, an homage or something that was respectful. And it took a while, but she gave us the permission to license the song for the film. And because we had that permission, it was easy for the record, and they do own the master. It was easy to get the permission.
That one and the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra.
Sure.
Right.
Jelly Jelly.
Yeah.
And that was
Gotcha.
that was also.
Gotcha. Tell me no, you already own it.
That was another situation where we had to do extra clearance, because with the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, that's union contracted musicians.
Sure.
We are an independent film with a very limited budget. And
Can I ask about that? Can
Yes.
I ask
Well,
what
this is why
your
Mel's
music
so
budget
great.
was?
Because I would ask Pilar, because Pilar was like, I'm bringing my girl Mel on to do the clearances. And I was like, great, whatever. Like, I don't even know what that is. Like, so, and then every time these conversations would go on, I would check in with Pilar, like, how are we doing on blah, blah, blah. And she's like, Mel's got it covered, don't worry.
right.
And Mel had it covered.
I'm asking about the budget because when I saw the film, obviously I wasn't a music supervisor yet. I watched it again a couple nights ago with my calculator. Like, wait a minute.
Well, we went over on music.
Yes, absolutely we did.
We went
Clearly.
slightly over on music.
You had some hits in there.
We went slightly over on music, but the studio was like, they actually gave us some more money just to do the music part, because
Yes.
they feel that's part of, the selling.
We were very fortunate with this particular project because everyone recognized and understood that the music was absolutely a character in the film, and it was something that needed to be supported. So, and I think another thing that I want to mention is that I think that the type of record deal that we had was also unprecedented, because Love Jones was not part of the Sony family. Sony Soundtracks was an established entity already with things like Sleepless in Seattle, like huge moneymakers in the genre. They took a gamble on this little independent Black movie. It wasn't necessarily it wasn't part of their roster. They already had chosen and had a rollout for the soundtracks that they were committed to. It was something where the head of soundtracks at the time, Glenn Brumman, and his group really got behind the project. They really bought into Ted's vision, and they put up a substantial budget. But it was something where it was really kind of just pushing numbers around on paper, because a majority of the acts were from their roster. They recognized that they had the artistry to support this. And once New Line saw the buzz that we were getting, because one of the other things that we did that I don't think was necessarily a regular practice at the time is Pilar was always so ahead of her time and so creative about the way that she would take on a project and market it to the music peers in the industry. So she would get New Line to host artist screenings, and we would do these things. Normally, a film in post-production is under lock and key. You can't get it off the lot, let alone take a copy of a film that's in post editorial to Sony Soundtracks and screen it for the Fujis of the world, the Maxwells. And we would do these really kind of exclusive get-togethers where we had the tastemakers take a look at this project, and it became this kind of jockeying thing where we were getting things from all over the place. It was like, for me, it was such a rewarding experience because we're fielding calls and I'm talking to icons that I love about this project, and we're getting great feedback. I had creative conversations with Cassandra Wilson about like where we wanted her to particularly place her song. It was just something where it was this creative kind of work of art, like a labor of love for everybody involved.
We were talking a little bit earlier about Ted was mentioning he just didn't want a straight ahead R&B soundtrack, and this is a lot of things, but it is not that. The soundtrack to this film feels like score. It's moody, it's intimate. It's like Pilar took your movie, put a blanket around it, and said you can relax. It feels like a friend, and you have a club called The Sanctuary. You've got A Love Letter to Chicago. You've got rain. You've got moodiness. And you never thought for a minute, what's that song? What's that song? Because it moved. The movie and the soundtrack worked together perfectly. The choices were elegant. They didn't take you out of the film. One of my favorite uses also, and I was going to ask you about In a Sentimental Mood, was that the early decision for that to be playing in the record store, for that to be Darius's?
That was scripted. You wrote that in the script.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That was scripted.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have to clear that? Because I remember the record store, did you have to clear the other albums that were showing? Did you have to?
Yes.
Yeah. Because Juke Joint is, you can see
all of the images we had to
you
get.
can see Juke Joint.
We had to get licenses for the visual album covers.
I was curious about that because there were some hits showing in the record store, but I saw the Q's Juke Joint. That was one of the first things I saw in the stacks.
It's a different clearance though. It's not the same as like a sync license, but you do have to get permission to use those images as well.
Pilar would just tell me that Mel's got it covered.
I think that's because she knew that she trained me well. I was absolutely her protege from the beginning. She taught me everything that I know about music supervision. My very first jobs working in film music were due to Pilar. I started as an intern at RCA Records, and from there, I think maybe 2 summers into college, I got a call from Pilar, Mel, I'm working on this film project and I need an assistant, and my mom reminded me that you worked at a record label. Come talk to me. And that's how it started. And that project was this movie called Sugar Hill starring Wesley Snipes. And just as a testimony to her brilliance, she started on that project as the music coordinator. She was the assistant. So the music coordinator is the right hand to the music supervisor. You handle clearance, you assist them just with every aspect. You can be helping them with temp score, with song selection, it depends. And she was just so strong in her role and I think it was also a very music-heavy project that she received co-supervisor credit on Sugar Hill. And from there, she ended up working with Happy Walters at Sidewinder and went on to supervise easily over 20 projects. And I went back to school. Was a journalism and marketing major, so I was working in billboard advertising and absolutely hated my job. And I was like circulating my resume, and Pilar was on my resume. Someone called her, and so she called me like, Mel, you're looking for work? Look, I'm leaving Happy, I'm starting my own company, and I need you to come work with me. What are you doing right now? Come meet with me. And so I left my advertising position that I hated, like as a marketing assistant, and she literally had 3 projects. Her first 3 projects that she was working on, Love Jones, Set It Off, and Gridlock, which is one of Tupac's last films. So it was just like trial by fire. It was an amazing experience. I learned music clearance. I mean, she empowered me every step of the way. Usually in a coordinator position, you don't necessarily have to be as hands-on as the supervisor. She took me every place with her, scoring sessions, executive meetings, and she empowered me to voice my opinion. She valued my opinion, and she just was amazing to work with.
What I found was, because I didn't, this is my first movie, right? So I didn't really know what a music supervisor did. I was just told that I had to have one, right? So I'm like, okay, well, I'll figure out how to work with this person or whatever they do. But what I found was with her, and I don't even know if this works with everybody, but with her, she could have her hands in any pie, and I would actually give her more pies to put her hands in. Right?
Absolutely.
Because her influence on her interaction with me just continued to expand.
Right.
When we were prepping the movie, I had found this reggae band to do that tune. Another.
And I had to clear that too.
Well, another. Right. It's actually another. It's another kind of disappointment of mine that song is not on the record.
On the record,
it's actually very
no
difficult
way.
to find. No way. That was no way that was going to happen. But so we had to do that as a pre-record. Obviously, we were going to shoot that to playback. And she flew into Chicago, and I was just going to produce the session myself. Like, it was not a big deal to me. We were just going to record them in a studio. It wasn't like a heavy thing. And I specifically wanted to record it live, more or less. She came in
and told you that you don't do that.
Well, it's not that she tried to push, this is where, you try and push back on Ted. But what she did was, she came in, she had booked a studio, and she kind of supervised the set. Like, my point is not that is not to say that there was a conflict between us. My point is to say that this was the first time where I was like, oh, she's getting her hands in this. Okay, she seems like she knows what she's doing. Let's see if I can get her to have her hands in this. And by the end of it, I could have her contribute in any number of ways. She was sending me tapes and sending me ideas.
Right.
I got stacks and stacks and stacks of ideas and tapes, and I got a problem here that I need to solve. Can you give me 20 ideas? And 20 ideas would show up. The 3 weeks before she died, she and I are texting about Ravel, and which can I get? A clearance for this Ravel piece that I want to use in the next film. We were talking about that. Her interest level was vast.
Absolutely.
And her taste level was high.
Absolutely.
And so as our relationship developed, I began to trust her more and more to get into my creative soup as deeply as she wanted to get. And I did not let anybody into that space. But her, I trusted. So
yeah,
she taught me what a music supervisor did.
Amen.
Which makes it this particular occasion incredibly sad. Like, I wish we were not meeting under these circumstances. But
agreed. Yes, absolutely.
So the other thing I'll mention, I'll give you
Sure.
the Prince story.
Yes.
Were you the one trying to get? You were tasked with this, right?
Yes.
Oh my God. I had cut this scene that I won't mention because there's another song there now. I had cut this particular scene in the movie to a Prince song. I had to have this song. And so if I was, I'm a first-time director. I don't know anybody. I can't get a hold of Prince personally. So I have to rely on the people around me. So I tasked Pilar with getting a hold of Prince, and I guess she tasked you.
I had to fax
Right.
Paisley Park.
Right. To get this song clear.
They don't answer anybody.
No answer.
And we had, as a music supervisor, it's all about your relationships. You cultivate relationships, especially on the publishing and clearance side. There are only a handful of people that you're going to deal with. You're going to deal with them on a regular basis. So at the time, there was this one particular person at Warner Chappell Music Publishing, and
Yep.
every
We all know.
right. So Pilar was very meticulous. So we had our own. I think it was like maybe 3 times a week we would go over just the schedule of clearances. So we have the spreadsheet, and it indicates the master licensor, the publishing, each party. Like I'm giving her an update, and just day after day after day, it's like I don't have anything to report. Yes, I've called, I've left messages. I don't know what else to tell you. And It was the bane of my existence. That
Down to the dub stage.
Not
I was on
there.
the
There
dub
was
stage.
there was that. There were several songs though, Mr. Witcher, if I recall. There was some Isley Brothers material.
Right, sure.
There. I can't quite remember the Isley Brothers though, and that Prince. That was very difficult. Just there was
Prince
no way.
That was a loss, because that would have been nice to have. And then,
We just never received an answer.
right, we never,
Never,
it wasn't
ever.
a no. It was, we never got a hold
We
of
just
that.
never, and it wasn't for lack of trying. I mean,
Yeah,
they
I know
did.
Y'all tried. I know y'all tried. You know, I ran into Prince years later, and he was a big fan.
Of the movie,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I've heard that. I've never ever had the pleasure of meeting him. I've been a lifelong fan. So I know that there were several people that I met later who turned out to be fans. I think that this is like we were talking about this earlier. It's just one of the high points of my career. It's been a creative calling card. It's something that I can look back with pride, and it's also been kind of offered me carte blanche in terms of other creative projects. So I'm very proud.
You know, we're sad we couldn't get Sade either.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was something else. Sade too, because
I walked in this wasn't on them. This was on Sade, because you know Sade, right?
But what you got-
Sade goes on break. She breaks. And they told me I was so mad when she did that song for A Wrinkle in Time. I was so mad.
You know what?
Because
But
they told
I
me,
know that Pilar.
I said in the first meeting, I was like, "Yo, we're at Sony, right? We have to get Sade," and they said unequivocally, "Sade's on a break," because she had done Love Deluxe was the last one before. Right, she was in the middle of her sabbatical, and I was like, they were like, "No, you don't understand. We can't. She's out." And I said, "You can't get a song. She can't go into the studio and cut one track for this." And they were like, "You don't understand Sade. Sade says don't call us, and we don't call, and we wait for her to." And literally that break lasted another 5 years, or
Right.
another 3 years, until Love Deluxe or whatever the next Lovers
But
Rock,
you know
or
what
whatever
they
the
did
next-
deliver?
the next record was.
What they delivered was, and I don't know if you remember this, the Sade connection was Maxwell, because Maxwell was produced by Stuart Matthewman and the backing group behind Sade. So we did somewhat
Sweetwater.
Well, something's
Sweetback
in there.
also.
An Ascension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
We want to thank our guests for giving us so much backstory on the music.
Oh, we could go on. We could go on and on.
Love Jones.
To the break of dawn.
We just want to recognize Pilar and just a few quick thoughts about her. What is music supervision? When done well, it is mastery at managing musical moments. Pilar McCurry surely did that. She understood the preciousness of cultural touchstones, whether that meant dropping in Parliament's flashlight at the beginning of Set It Off, Papa Was a Rolling Stone and Proud Mary, or Curtis Mayfield, Give Me Your Love, and Love Jones. She knew black folks and black music. She knew our jams. In the same way that John Hughes soundtracks are teen angst set against 80s punk, this was a love letter to neo-soul, perfectly curated by Pilar McCurry, Jonathan McHugh, and also our guest, Melodee Sutton. A meticulously chosen list of hits that, when considered, makes my top 10 soundtracks of all time whenever I have the honor of being asked. If you recall, those who have seen the movie, towards the end of the film, Nia reads a dedication that Darius has written in the beginning of his book, Gypsy Eyes. It says, "To the woman who helped me reach my level, she knows who she is." One of the women that helped me reach my level is Pilar McCurry. I never got a chance to meet her or thank her for blazing that trail and for her mastery of managing this musical moment that I won't forget, a thing of beauty called the Love Jones soundtrack for a gorgeous film written and directed by Theodore Witcher. Thank you so much, Ted.
If I may, my regret to follow on with that, and thank you for that, was that there's something, and maybe you all, as music supervisors or in the guild, can deal with this in some kind of way. But when we were doing the credits, because in this film I had put the credits at the end of the film, and so all of the usual the credit requirements, they all went backwards, right? My name came first as opposed to last, as it would, then the producers and the actors, whatever. So I got into a real scuffle about her card because she had a precedent in her deal of having a single card in the main titles, which I thought I would just run that backwards. And the DGA would not approve it. They made me, and I had a screaming match with the DGA, they made me put her in the crawl because the DGA requirements are that the unit manager, the first AD unit manager, that card, and then everybody else. And they would not let me put the music supervisor's credit before that in the end of and I yelled at them, and I said, was very embarrassed. I had to say to her, I'm sorry, but I have to, even though you have a precedent for this, and your name has appeared this way before, I have to put you in the crawl as opposed to an individual main title card. So I don't know, you all, as you go forward and make your deals, maybe that's something you might want to pay attention to. But it's actually a great regret of mine.
It's something where you have to petition the DGA.
Yeah, I have to. I'll work on that. But she should have been credited on a single card in the main titles, along with the costume designer and everybody else. Such was her contribution to the film. So, my friend.
Without further ado, Love Jones.